Greg Fleniken was a man of simple pleasures. The warm summer night of Wednesday, September 15th, 2010 began just the way he liked it, in the same way he'd spent many nights before, lounging on his bed in room 348 of MCM Eleganté Hotel. With a cigarette in hand, AC on full blast, Reese's Crispy Crunch Bar and a can of root beer at the ready, Greg relaxed as he watched Iron Man 2 on the television set in front of him. Though tragically, Greg would never reach the end of the film. Greg was no stranger to nights in solitude. In his younger years, he'd been a chief engineer on ocean-going vessels, spending months at a time at sea away from his friends and family. In his older age, he and his brother Michael had built a thriving oil land leasing business in a small city to the east of Houston. As a successful business owner, Greg often found himself on the road, again away from his loving wife Susie. Wednesday, September 15th, 2010 was no different. The Monday prior, Greg had made his usual 2-hour drive west to the MCM Eleganté Hotel, where he planned to sleep for the coming days as he worked nearby. While Greg may have spent lots of time away from home, this distance never stopped Greg from maintaining close contact with his wife. The couple constantly exchanged texts, phone calls, emails, and anything else to close the distance between them. When Greg didn't answer his wife's customary good morning call to his office on Thursday the 16th, she became alarmed. As were his coworkers, who noticed that he had, without warning, not shown up to work and wasn't returning any of their calls. This prompted 2 of his coworkers to make a visit to his hotel room to check up on him. It is then when they discovered Greg. Within an hour of discovering Greg's body, Detective Scott Apple was on the scene, but there was little question in his mind as to what happened in room 308. At first glance, the circumstances behind Greg's death were fairly unremarkable. The only visible injury Greg had was a 1-inch scrape on his left cheek, precisely where his face met the carpet below. This led those who discovered him to assume that he had suffered a fairly commonplace death, potentially a heart attack or something of the like. Detective Apple searched the room and found no signs of a struggle, no blood or large wounds, no pills or signs of an overdose, nothing that made this case seem out of the ordinary. Greg even still had his wallet in his pocket containing a small stack of 100 bills in it, ruling robbery out of the question. That being said, and after learning about Greg's history with cigarettes, junk food, and the like, it seemed like an open and shut case. Detective Scott Apple concluded that it was simply Greg's choices which had caught up with him. Thus, the body was transported for post-mortem exam to determine which of Greg's vices had led to his untimely and tragic death. Though with closer inspection by examiner Dr. Tommy Brown, it was revealed that Greg had suffered more than just a scrape to the cheek. He had extensive internal injuries, including intestinal damage, lacerations on the stomach and liver, 2 broken ribs, and a small hole in the right atrium of his heart. It was clear that Greg had not simply died of a heart attack or something similar. He had suffered a severe beating, or had been crushed. In addition, and most curious of all, Greg had a small half-inch laceration to his scrotum. From here, extensive bruising and swelling branched up to his groin area and right hip. Though these peculiar injuries were easily explained away as likely a kick or a strike to the groin that Greg received in the fight which ultimately led to his death. One thing was certain though, Greg hadn't simply died of natural causes. It was very evident that Greg had died at the hands of another individual. Thus, Greg's manner of death was ruled a homicide. From here, the investigation began. Beaumont was not a town known for violent crime or murders. Greg was one of the few homicide cases which happened each year. Most of these cases were far from mysterious. The police could usually rely on a drunk partner, local drug dealer, or the like to spill the beans and shut the case. Though the lack of evidence, motive, and suspects left the death of Greg Fleniken a complete and utter mystery. There was a distinct lack of leads for detectives to follow. Greg was not a man known for having enemies. Matter of fact, he was entirely the opposite. He was the last guy anyone would expect to be murdered. So who would do this to him? There were 2 prevailing theories. The first theory simply revolved around sex. Affairs and the like are motivation in many homicide cases, and thus it was a reasonable place to start. Though Greg was not suspected by any to be the type of man to have an extramarital affair. Greg was in a loyal, loving relationship with his wife, evident by their constant communication and contact. Furthermore, Greg wasn't a drunk, he was never spotted frequenting bars, he didn't go out and socialize much, and certainly wasn't out picking up women. This ultimately ruled out the possibility of Greg being the victim of an angry boyfriend or husband. Curiously, a maintenance man of the Eleganté Hotel had an extensive history as a sex offender. This led some to believe that Greg had possibly been his next victim, an unwitting casualty of a bizarre sexual assault gone wrong. The substantial injuries Greg received to his groin helped to support this idea, though this theory was heavily investigated by detectives and never advanced beyond suspicion. It was a wild theory and remained at that. The second theory surrounded a group of union electricians staying in the room next door to Greg at the Eleganté Hotel. These men were in town for an extended period of time, working a job for a local oil company. In the evenings, these men were often seen gathering in one room to drink together. Could Greg have been the victim of a drunken rage? Maybe these men were partying too loud and Greg asked them to quiet down, leading to an altercation. These men were originally questioned the day of the discovery, though none aroused any suspicion nor claimed to have any interaction with Greg. They willingly offered their driver's licenses, phone numbers, and anything the detectives asked for to help with the case. They were happy to help and seemingly entirely innocent. This theory ultimately led Detective Apple to yet another dead end. Many months passed since Greg's death, and his family began to become frustrated. They had tried everything, working with law enforcement, offering a $50,000 reward for information, but nothing had worked. This is when they decided to get a fresh pair of eyes on the case. They contacted former FBI agent and private investigator Ken Brennan. When Ken Brennan arrived in Beaumont, he made a point to reach out to Detective Apple. His best source of information would be the man who originally took the case. The two met late one evening at a sports bar to go over the details. The two hit it off right away and decided that if the case was going to be solved, two heads would certainly be better than one. Brennan and Apple decided to team up and finally put an end to the cold case once and for all. They agreed to meet at the Eleganté in the morning and parted for the evening, eager to get to the bottom of the mystery that had been haunting Beaumont for so long. Once at the Eleganté Hotel, Apple began to show Brennan the crime scene, photos from the day of, and the autopsy results. After a brief period of deliberation, Brennan announced, "I think I know how he died. I think I know who killed him, and I think I know how we're going to catch him." Brennan was extremely suspicious of the electricians next door. While they had been previously cleared by detectives, they did seem like they could be prime suspects in this case, and thus warranted a second look. This included interviewing the electricians' co-workers and reviewing surveillance footage from the night of, both of which revealed some peculiarities which had been overlooked in investigations prior. The surveillance footage showed the electricians making multiple trips to the car in the parking lot. This wasn't overly suspicious, since the men were drinking. It was within the realm of possibility that they had to visit their car to grab more alcohol, or the like. It was certainly noteworthy, though, worth keeping in mind going forward. When interviewing a coworker of the electricians, he had mentioned hearing rumors of a story about a gun going off in the hotel room of the electricians, a potential misfire by one of the coworkers, likely fueled by drunken antics. There's no evidence immediately tying this story to the investigation, though it did convince Brennan and Apple to return to the scene of the crime a second time, potentially in search of bullet holes left behind. Once back in room 348, Brennan and Apple began to search high and low. Still, no signs of a bullet hole in any wall or furniture. Frustrated and convinced that this story had to be related, Brennan suggested that the two investigators take a look at the room next door, the room of the electricians. Surely, if there had been a gunshot in that room, there would have to be evidence left behind. It was then when this case was blown wide open. Brennan noticed a small, discolored speck on the wall. It appeared to have once been a small hole, but was since filled with a faintly pink-colored filler. It was eventually determined that this filler was toothpaste. Most amazingly of all, though, when a laser was shined through this hole in the wall, it pointed directly at the bed of Greg Fleniken. Now it was obvious what had happened. A bullet had fired through the wall, entering the groin of Greg. tearing up his insides as it made his way through his body. This theory was agreed upon by the medical examiner in a following visit. It made perfect sense, and the evidence was there to back it up, specifically the hole in Greg's heart. Brown, the medical examiner, had not suspected it to be a bullet before, but now it was unmistakable. All that was left was speaking to the electricians once again. Tim Steinmetz, one of the electricians in room 349, was likely shocked to get a call from Texas police asking for a second interview, as it had been 7 months since the incident in question, but he obliged nonetheless. Brennan and Apple walked Steinmetz through the evening. He was asked to elaborate on the events that took place. He was not pushed at all, simply asked to recount the night he had next door to Greg. It was exactly as he had described before, a fun night of drinking with coworkers after a hard day's work. No more, no less. Brennan and Apple carefully took notes and wrote out Steinmetz's statement of events. Steinmetz happily signed it and was preparing to depart. Finished with his statement and satisfied with his explanation, he was about to leave when Brennan dropped the bombshell.
Hang on a second. It wasn't until you signed that statement. Now you got a problem.
Okay.
You just made a false police report, that's why. You want to go to jail for that?
Tim, we know what happened. We know everything that happened down there. And I realize you're trying to be noble and protect a friend, but you're about to get your whole family in a bind, and it's not worth it.
When confronted with the truth of the evening and the possibility of being charged with providing a false statement to the police, Steinmetz confessed and revealed the actual story of what happened that evening in the Eleganté Hotel. This was later corroborated by Trent Pisano, an electrician also present in the room. That evening, the men had been drinking beer together. Mueller, the third electrician, had asked Pisano to run out to his car to grab a bottle of whiskey and also his 9mm pistol he left behind. Pisano ran out to the car and retrieved both. This is what was seen in the surveillance footage. Once the two were brought up to his room, Mueller began to play and fiddle with the pistol. This, coupled with his booze-fueled incoordination, eventually led to an accidental discharge, shocking the men. The gun was then returned to the car, the hole filled with toothpaste, and the men went on with their life as though it never had happened. Mueller originally refused to believe that his accidental discharge resulted in the death of Greg Fleniken. The three men had convinced themselves the gunshot was unrelated to the man's death. This was made much easier by the original medical report, suggesting no evidence of a bullet wound on Greg's body. Though when confronted with the facts of the case, it was impossible to deny. Mueller was eventually charged and received 10 years for his crime, thus concluding the case and solving the mystery of the body in room 308. Thank you guys for watching this video. This is the first time I've made sort of a true crime, spooky, video like this. But if you guys liked it, please subscribe, like, comment what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys next time.